One day, my husband told me, "Shut your mouth and keep it a secret." He came home, and there was no one there. Years later, he met his wife again and could not believe his eyes. Recently, my husband came out with a phrase that perfectly showed his attitude toward me. He said that he was not going to consult with me about our family budget because I was on maternity leave and not earning any money. At the same time, he somehow forgot that part of our expenses were covered by the rent from my apartment. Right now, I really am on maternity leave. Our son will soon be a year and a half, and I still have about the same amount of time left at home with him. If I have the opportunity to leave the child with his grandparents, I'd gladly go back to work, but that's not an option for now. We live in my husband's apartment. It's more convenient. He gets to work without transfers, and I can walk to the children's clinic, which is also very handy. But I also own an apartment, which I have been renting out since we started living together. The rent brings in a decent income. Honestly, if not for that, I probably wouldn't have risked taking maternity leave at all. My husband works. He's not lazy. Before maternity leave, I also worked, and sometimes I even earned more than he did. At my job, everything was based on deals. After successfully closing contracts, there was a chance to get a solid bonus. I never talked much about these extra earnings because I thought it might upset him. I wanted to protect his self-esteem. When I found out I was pregnant, the first thing I did was calculate whether I could afford to go on maternity leave without having to count every penny. I grew up in a very poor family, so it was important to me that my child would not face the same problems. I calculated my husband's salary, the maternity payments, and the income from my apartment rental, and I was satisfied. We wouldn't be living luxuriously, but we would survive 3 years without extreme cutbacks. My husband was just happy about the baby and didn't bother to think about the finances. Of course, my going on maternity leave affected our budget, but it was expected. I cut back on spending and things stabilized. I paid the utilities with the rental income, bought some of the groceries with it too, and my husband covered the rest. Beforehand, we had agreed that we would always inform each other about any significant expenses, since we shared a common budget. At first, he followed this rule, but for the past 6 months, everything has gone downhill. I try to plan, but he either forgets or simply doesn't consider it necessary to tell me about his spending. Several times I let it slide, trying to keep the peace, but in the end, I would find myself in situations where there was suddenly no money for necessary things. The last argument was especially unpleasant. My husband said, "You're on maternity leave. You don't earn anything. Why on earth should I ask your opinion or report to you?" I reminded him that part of our budget came from my money, the rent from my apartment, without which we'd be in serious trouble. But he insisted that this didn't count as my income since I didn't earn it myself. He also reminded me that we lived in his apartment. So, according to his logic, he was the breadwinner and didn't owe me any explanations, while I was supposedly doing nothing because in his eyes, staying at home with a child was not real work. I didn't want to tolerate such an attitude. Of course, I couldn't just move out right away. My apartment was rented out, and without the rental income, we wouldn't have had enough money to live on. So I started negotiating with my boss about working remotely. If that worked out, I planned to end the rental agreement and move back into my own apartment. And it did work out. My boss allowed me to work remotely without a strict schedule. I packed my things and moved into my own apartment with my child. Gradually, life started to improve. My son grew older and started kindergarten. I was promoted at work and began to earn a very good salary. Over time, I built a career, bought a new apartment, got myself a nice car, and could afford expensive salons. One day, as I was leaving a luxury beauty salon, I ran into my husband. He was stunned. In front of him stood a confident, successful, beautiful businesswoman. He simply could not believe his eyes.